Hi, good evening. That was a great intro to where K-Hub is going forward in the next 10 years, and we are very happy to be a part of that and sort of give the first feed into that big system that's going to run up and probably make a huge difference in terms of social impact soon in Nizamabad. You can start the presentation. So I'm going to be just 5 minutes sort of giving you a preview of what we are doing in terms of the campus that's coming up in Nizamabad. Thank you, Fani Garu, Raju Garu. I mean, the vision that you set up for the entire sandbox system, along with the Deshpande Foundation, is the germination point for us, for our architecture also. One slide back. So the campus for K-Hub, that's what we are nicknamed it, and pretty much everybody is addressing it, although we are calling it Sandbox till now. It is going to be a very humble, institutional, but much more complexly organized programmatic system. I'll just explain to you how we have thought through this project, just as a 5 minutes prelude before I run a small animation for it. Next, please. So the site itself, you can see behind the sofas, is actually a 15-minute drive from Nizamabad, just 9 kilometers away, inside a sort of a rural setup, right? So it's almost as if it is, it's radiating the spirit of how a rural setup should be, right? Which is what Sandbox's spirit is as well. Next slide, please. And the site has a very strange proportion. When they came to us, we have already done a project right next to this, Nizamabad. For all this saying that it's a small town, small city, just developing, it is not really how people there have ambitions, right? What we have done, a 22-home net zero community right next to it, when even in tier 1 cities like Hyderabad, we can't convince developers to do it. So Nizamabad is really, we think, is a really forward-thinking town. And the site that we got, unfortunately, was not your best version of a site, right? It's almost a 1:7 ratio of depth to width. So in this, again, in the spirit of Sandbox, the way that you would imagine adversity getting converted into opportunity, right? And in architecture also, you're trying to find the same thing, right? It's what you would normally not be imagining as a regular site has been handed to us. So how do we now make sure that our design is taking this forward? Next slide, please. So before we started our design and trying to understand how Sandbox worked, the 3 words that stood out to us and the type of demography that they actually work with. It is not like this, like an IT sector sort of campus or purely an institutional setup. It's a mix of all kinds of demographical people with different backgrounds coming and merging together in this place. So we said the idea of plurality, diversity, and inclusiveness. These are the 3 aspects that in architecture we'll try to capture and try to see how we can be a catalyst in making this work together as a social hub. Next, please. So we created 5 fundamental principles for our architecture, all of which are around this idea of collaboration and trying to bring a sense of identity and community for this social group. So every aspect of the program and the spaces that we created would revolve around these 5 principles. Next, please. Next, please. So instead of a typical campus where you would always go with blocks of buildings, right? So you'll have different programs separated by different blocks of architecture. So instead of that, here we said we'll mix them all up, right? So there is no separation of here is where teaching happens, here is where innovation happens, here is where making happens, because typically workshops will be kept somewhere else, and that's something we started seeing in many institutional campuses. So we said instead of that, we'll make a super compact, highly diverse and active hub, and probably the name hub really suits this kind of spatial organization. Next, please. So the entire campus is actually not a typical institution where you would come and you would see a big building and then you enter. It's actually a highly porous architecture with a lot of inside, outside spaces, a very complex mix of programs that all kind of act and give more activity in each of these spaces. So without going into the details of it, you could pretty much see how much of programmatic difference there is, right? There is some are small buildings, some are auditoriums, some are maker spaces, all sort of gelled together. Next, please. So in the site, we put all the active programs towards the front, and we have moved the residential, and there is a stay area for students stays hostels, and there's a dining program which is in the back. Next, please. So when you see the main campus, the architecture is highly differentiated by color. So you can see it is not separated by different types of programs, but the heart of this, next slide please. The heart of this becomes a place where an auditorium, a crest area that Raju Garu was mentioning, a cafeteria, an outdoor sort of a garden, all of this merged together to create the center which becomes the heart of this whole campus. Next please. And that is not just in plan, but in section also. So people are looking down from like what you're seeing here, a sort of a microcosm of what's happening here. Next please. So that cafeteria opening into a lawn, opening into a crest, and the incubation area, all of them coming together, looking up into the classrooms. So this is the kind of activity that we are trying to create through our architecture. Next please. And the open space always spills into all of these common areas. So it really opens up for larger events to happen, for expanding each of these spaces into a much more active outdoor setup. And small gestures like staircases going there, each of these spaces having their own program. For instance, the front is an exhibition area which can become part of the community. So the entire campus can open up to the rest of the city. There's an auditorium which would also be part of the city. So it's not just the in-house programs that will happen here, but people can rent this and actually expand into that lawn that we are given behind the auditorium. Next please. And this also kind of becomes part of every space that is inside this. For instance, there's an office space, there is incubation and co-work areas. We are designing exhibition areas which could be rented out that can make a revenue generation for the campus. And a lot of conference hall, they call it shark tanks. It's almost like pitching your idea as an entrepreneur inside the campus. Next please. And the architecture itself is somehow broken down to come into a human scale. It sort of greets you as you enter, but it also brings technology and a sense of earthiness. It's almost technology is coming down and meeting a rural setup, right? It's a brick building. It has mud plaster on one side, but coming down to meet it is a steel structure with solar panels and PV power generation at the entrance. It's not something hiding on the rooftop, but actually becoming the symbol of the project. Next please. And as you enter, it is not a lobby, right? You enter into an outdoor space. You actually go through the project as if it's an open campus, not an introverted building. Next please. And the materials we have used are all mostly local. Brick, natural stone, earth tones, and mud plaster on one side. So it's not your typical campus. It actually is reflective of what is the purpose of this entire organization is. Next please. And for learning, we have created different types of scales of program. An auditorium which is for 150 students, but can also be rented out to the city for special functions. There's something underneath that which becomes a social hub for smaller groups to happen. Next please. And the area under the auditorium has been smartly put together as another small OAT. Next please. That actually you can pull your classrooms out. Next please. But the classrooms themselves are fairly international. They are not really your typical classrooms, but part of a gallery setup that you would find in management schools. It's a great way to take rural youngsters and kind of introduce them to this kind of a corporate world where business happens through your learning environment. Next please. All of this is done with a highly responsive and responsible thinking towards a sustainable green future. So the project is designed as a IGBC platinum rated building, and this would probably be the first campus in Nizamabad that would be IGBC rated campus. And that's done through a whole series of passive and active systems. The building itself is designed to reduce the amount of solar heat gain. We have studied each of the classrooms to make sure that you don't have to switch on the light for 60% of the day, 60% of the operating time. The rooftop offsets this by using solar power. Next please. The water is also completely stored at site. So the farm pond that Raju Garu was mentioning, there is a version of that in the site also, so you could see it. And part of the area in the back is actually for agriculture. Next, please. And all the plantation we are doing here are indigenous, so that you could attract back whatever is the local flora and fauna. Next, please. And that feeds into the dining hall where all the kids are eating, so there is organically grown food on site. Next, please. And there's a lot of, really well done and well made residential facilities for all the students, with dorms, guests to come and stay, for faculty members to stay. So these are all part of the residential zone of the campus. Next, please. And as of now, there's quite a bit of progress that's happened. So there's fairly recent, maybe 2 weeks old picture. So this is becoming real. So next time probably we'll have it in the campus, a function like this. I'm looking forward to it. I'll just run a small animation just to capture the spirit of what you have designed. Thank you.